Hello, I'm Tian Wei, and welcome to World Insight. The G20 foreign ministers are meeting in Bali, Indonesia this week. On the sidelines of the meeting, Chinese State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang is set to meet with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. It will be their first face-to-face meeting in 8 months. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is also attending the meeting. Meanwhile, many hope the G20 foreign ministers will be working with international partners to confront global challenges during the meeting this week, including food and energy security, as well as the fallout from the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Let's take a look at this discussion. For more on the G20 foreign ministers meeting and also related diplomatic interactions, we are joined in Washington, D.C. Saurabh Gupta, who is a senior Asia-Pacific International Relations Policy Specialist with the Institute for China-American Studies. Also joining us from China in Shanghai, Shending Li, professor from the Institute of International Studies with Fudan University. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. G20, always one of the most crucial multilateral platforms taking place annually. The foreign ministers meeting is laying some kinds of important foundation for the leaders summit later this year. Now, how much do you see is their cooperative spirit? Professor Shen, briefly.
I think G20 means to manage those global challenges. And the foreign minister level meeting will prepare for the agenda and substance for the summit. And at this time, I think most members will care about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. So how to find certain way to promise that the negotiation for ceasefire will be on the right track, and how to assure energy and fertilizer, etc., the stable supply from that region can possibly help ease those concerns.
Now, some suggest, Mr. Gupta, this is likely to be another occasion China and United States might be clashing with one another, for example, on the issue of Russia-Ukraine conflict. Others say, well, this will be one of those rare to come opportunities for the two top diplomats from the countries to sit down and talk to one another. Now, what do you think is likely to be the option?
I think it's going to be the former. The United States has not lost any opportunity this year, particularly within multilateral settings, to make it a us versus them game, especially in a year when there have been such traumatic developments. Yes, there will be productive conversations happening on the side, but the takeaway that the United States would like to leave is that it came forward aggressively and made demands related to Ukraine and the economic and social consequences of Ukraine to the international system, including to the Chinese in particular, because they are seen to be the closest partner of the Russians.
Yeah. So you see the tone has already been set before even the two top diplomats went into conversation.
Yes, I think so, absolutely. And we're just coming out of the NATO summit, we're just coming out of the G7. I don't expect the tone to change qualitatively, even though there is an understanding this is G20, there are development and economic priorities which need to be focused on fundamentally. But I think this is going to be about Ukraine and about who's doing what and who's not doing what. And I'm afraid it's not going to be the conversation.
On the same day, Professor Shen, the United Nations put out the food report for the world. Now, many more on the brinks to starvation, according to that specific report, not to mention many global challenging issues, development issues, job opportunities, economic situation, financial problems, stagflation, and as well as climate change.
Actually, this is an issue of global concern. But recently, we have heard some positive news with the positive mediation of Turkish. the two sides, Russia and Ukraine, have managed to make a progress for their negotiation. So possibly in weeks, the two sides may reach certain agreement to assure the proper transportation and a safe passage through the sea lane, Black Sea, sea lane communication, to ship those fertilizer, energy, grain out of this region. And this is what America care. And that is something that China also care because we can benefit from such a supply. And we have a responsibility to assure other regions, especially Africa, will not be hurt by social challenges. So I think why I agree with Mr. Gupta, and the US will not waste this opportunity to raise this issue, to challenge Russia and the so-called partner China. But I think US would also understand G20 is not a G7. And the US has to respect other countries, especially the host country, Indonesia. And they do want to make sure through their management, the world challenge would be more properly conducted. And they don't want to split the G20. US should have the sensibility. Why raise the issue, but don't split the G20? So I would also hope China, US bilaterally, they would have some side meeting. And why they cannot resolve all differences. At least they would set the tone for the upcoming China-US summit. And they have to do something not to divide the two countries.
Development issue, of course, has always been an important one on the agenda of G20. Meanwhile, economic and financial situations among the emerging and developed economies also crucial. Now, Mr. Gupta, the world is facing stagflation. That is a problem for everybody. How do you see the positions where the economies are, developed ones versus developing ones and emerging economy?
Usually the G7 has been that body. The G20 has done useful work, particularly at the time of the global financial crisis and thereafter. But questions about inflation and questions about financial stability used to be a closed conversation within the G7. The important point now is that many of these exact challenges are challenges being faced equally in developed countries and developing countries, advanced economies and emerging economies. And therefore, I think there is a real opportunity this time to pluralize that discussion across the board in terms of coping with inflation, coping with energy-related deficiencies. You know, the United States Federal Reserve's interest rate is just going to go up, and that is going to cause turmoil both in advanced economies as well as in emerging economies. And therefore, the way they used to coordinate, say in the 80s and in the 90s, Germany, Japan, and the United States, that sort of coordination needs to be built more broadly on inflation, on exchange rates, as well as on sort of debt renegotiation with regard to poorer developing countries. And I think that platform, the G20 this year would be a perfect platform with a developing country as the chair, and the developing country, India, next year also as the chair, focusing on these issues.
Professor Shen, the economy is the biggest problem that we are facing altogether today. Now, how much do you see a platform like the G20 involving the economies of very different development stages will be able to at least play some role, not with the very precious time of a foreign ministers meeting, even though foreign ministers are very much focusing on diplomacy, but these days, it should also be able to support the economic cooperation among the economies.
Well, I think how to provide a stable economic development environment should be a great issue for various members to discuss. For instance, while the US these days have lots of problems for the inflation and for job employment, they do care how to import competent foreign goods, like goods from China, which are having good quality and which is less expensive. So America is carrying how to improve its own domestic economic situation by somehow ease those tariffs imposed by Trump government on China's export to the US. This is for the American interest. But if this can be done, this would also help a normal, more normal China-US bilateral trade environment.
One of the crucial things that people should not forget, gentlemen, is that G20, the reason it was established was exactly as a response to the 2008 financial crisis and the urgent need for international cooperation, particularly the roles of developing and emerging economies play and has been playing since then. So, Professor Shen, there is a problem that we have today that it seems that every multilateral platform, as long as there are leaders involved, will multilateral platforms be only a place for political rhetorics, or they will at least assume some of the early roles that they should be responsible to shoulder?
Well, personally, I understand those emotion that has been carried when those events you described happen. And listen to Russian side and by working out some common ground. Despite the difference, we should still make sure energy would be transferred from Russia, from Ukraine, securely from that region, rather than preventing them from transferring out. So I think the host country, Indonesia, have a greater challenge. Its envoy may visit EU Commission, visit Russia, how to make sure they would all attend and they all would have some tensions by staying at the same room and listening to each other, even though they would not enjoy with each other. And China and US, those major countries should play a very crucial role to encourage not to allow another round of a rhetorical barrage. And at the same time, working out some principle and cooperation, working out some strategy package. This is a great chance of challenge and opportunity. I hope eventually we would make it an opportunity.